How goes it, everyone? My name's Carpo, and this video is about police. So to start straight off, I'd like to say that first off, this is not an attack on police. It's in no way meant to be insulting or offensive to decent police officers who uphold the law to the best of their ability and have a rational mind when it comes to dealing with criminals. But the problem is, when we're in an intense situation, our rational mind takes a back seat. No matter how much training you have, even though the police training is very poor in this country, if you find yourself in a situation where you are confronted by somebody with a lead pipe, when people see that, how these police shot somebody that was unarmed, I mean, these things happen all the time. And they think, why didn't they tase them? Why didn't they shoot him in the leg? Why didn't they shoot to wound and not to kill? And the argument goes on and on. If you look at any time there's a police shooting, whether it be racial or otherwise, the thing is we have to realize, yes, that there is racial profiling going on a lot, and there always has been, but that's not going to go away because we tell it to go away. What we have to do is show where the cops make mistakes on all avenues, and this is kind of where I wanted to start off here by this disclaimer that it's not trying to be offensive to police. And I'm not just a person who had a bad situation happen to me and so I'm going to go out and talk shit about cops. It's more like the cost to society to allow police to tread over our rights, to plant evidence, which is completely appalling. The situation is more grave than just bad officers making bad decisions, or even good officers making bad decisions. There are no repercussions for those bad decisions. And the police that investigate these police brutality cases are often the same precincts, or the police that are defending one another. Any cop that comes out against other cops is instantly hated by his peers. He is, it's basically you stick together, and that's the mentality. For people who are not criminals, or don't consider themselves criminals, or don't do anything where they might get themselves in trouble, often you'll see comments like on a video or a story about it, about police brutality or a shooting, and somebody will say, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, then why are you getting yourself in trouble? And, well, these people shouldn't have moved, they should have listened to the police, and, oh, you should follow what you're told to do. But each issue is more complicated than that. Some of the suspects are high on drugs. Some of them maybe are just frustrated. There have been more than a few cases where police are called for a domestic disturbance and a husband and wife are arguing and somebody ends up getting shot or hurt because these people are already in an emotional state. And dealing with people in an emotional state should be a prerequisite to understanding how to be an officer. But setting aside all of the trivials and all the details, one of the biggest problems is that even for people who say, well, I'm not a criminal, I follow the law, it's still costing you in the long run. I want to start off with John Burge, who was convicted in, I think, 2006, and he served 4.5 years in prison. This was an officer that was in the Chicago PD. I believe he was either the chief or, one of the... You can look up the story. It's very well known from the torture cases that went on through the 70s and the 80s. Him and his crew, at least he was involved directly in torturing over 120 people, 120 suspects. And many of these people ended up suing later. The city of Chicago ended up paying out over $67 million. And regardless of whether you agree with a lawsuit like that or consider it frivolous or not, the point is that these cities are paying out this money to the victims. And this wasn't just slapping somebody or cuffing them and throwing them in a dark cell. They were hooking up electrical nodes to their genitals. They were putting plastic bags over their heads so they felt like they were suffocating. If you're electrocuting people, to get a confession, if you look back through history of many of the confessions that have been made under duress, people will say anything. And when your mind is in that fragile state, and you're being beaten, you're being hurt, you will say anything, and you might even convince yourself you really did it. Recently, the guy's name was Daryl Cannon. He got out of prison after 24 years, and he was one of the people that was convicted under and had this forced, admitted that he'd done it, and so he went to prison for it, and everybody wants a scapegoat. But now that DNA evidence and better police work is able to dismiss some of these old cases, we find out that maybe these people really were innocent. So it's not just the cost directly of the police who are harassing people, it's the cost of the lawsuits, it's the cost of the amount of people who end up being taken advantage of, pulled out of society. They're not allowed to contribute to their society, and the rest of the people are paying the tax money to keep them in prison. It's absurd, and it costs so much money. I did write down a few statistics here, which kind of, blew my mind, beyond cattle prods and putting shotguns in people's mouths to get a confession. New York City paid out $185.6 million in 2011 alone, and there were 8,882 claims against just the New York Police Department. So Oakland paid out $13 million in 2010 to 11, and that seems like a huge difference. You've got, over 100 million, and then you've got 13 million. But there were several other. This was a case of 28 police officers in Oakland that were all involved in this one case of sexual misconduct with a girl who was a prostitute who, at the beginning, had been a minor, and they had basically passed her around, metaphorically, in the sense that they let her go, but they were all having sex with her. I find that appalling. I find it disgusting that police would behave in this way. It's not about whether it's a prostitute. It's about many of these are victims of the sex trade, of the sex industry, if you will. And even though it's hidden from mainstream for most people, there is a lot of this going on in the world. I mean, human trafficking is a major issue. So the police should be first and foremost on top of these things to help people, not to try to get free sex out of the deal. And I find that pretty disgusting. And Oakland has had some huge issues. During Occupy Oakland, they arrested over 400 protesters and never charged any of them. And so now all these protesters are filing a countersuit, a suit anyway, against the city of Oakland for this. These stories come and go. They come and go. In the LA, there was a Rampart scandal where 70 cops were involved, and, this was $125 million in damages that were paid out. And the cops stick together. And I can understand that, and I respect the fact that you're going to stick with the people that you spend your time with and that you hopefully trust. But if you're not, if you're defending an officer who has done something wrong, you're just as guilty as they are. And the recent cases, I think in Baltimore, of planting evidence where the police cameras, they're trying to turn off their cameras at the right time so they don't, incriminate themselves, but they end up incriminating themselves anyway. I just want to say it doesn't take a genius to be a cop, and that doesn't mean cops are dumb. But there have been many cases of people, when you take these intelligence tests, where they're actually, you can look into this, it's true, people who are considered too intelligent are not hired as police because they're afraid that they might get bored with the job, or at least this is what they say, that they might talk back, they might be subordinate. And this is all true. I mean, it's, people see what they're doing and they think about it. Well, unfortunately, because of this, people think of cops as dumb, and a lot of the cops that are dumb pull all the rest of them in. Let me say I've met lots of good cops. I've met lots of kind cops and fair cops in my life. And it's not just about being a lucky white male in America. I've also had my house invaded and raided. I've been, cops have tried to get me to rat out my friends, and they confiscated all my stuff. They seized all my things, and I never got them back. So a few of the numbers to give you an idea of where this is an issue in the taxpayer realm. In the last 10 years, Boston has paid out $36 million in lawsuits. Chicago's paid over $521 million. That's $500 million. LA, $101 million, and New York, over 5 years, paid out $340 million. And on top of that, what they're finding is that the amounts awarded and paid out are often represented lower, if even half of what they really are being paid, what they're really paying out. And this is so for the insurers, for the police and the departments and whatnot. They don't want them to know how much they're really spending, on these lawsuits. But the amount of money, it's not just in how much they're paying out. It's the time that the police have to spend in court testifying, the money used to defend those police in court, the money given to the public defenders to defend others who can't afford their own representation. And it's really out of balance. It's out of whack. The people who have the money can buy their way out of anything. And this is what's appalling, is that it's not fair to anyone, and it never has been, as far as the only people who... It's kind of like getting a traffic ticket. You find out a lot more people speed when they have the money to afford the ticket. And in other countries, they've tried to enact, a sliding scale for tickets, and then somebody says, well, that's ridiculous. Then a billionaire has to pay $1 million for a ticket. It's very difficult to know what's the right way to go about it. Being a cop would really suck, okay? If you were stuck in a situation where the people around you were all corrupt, and you couldn't say anything about it, or were afraid to say anything about it. And I think that, I don't know if there's really an answer to the problem. We can say, well, we need to hire smarter cops, or we need to give cops more training. But what it comes down to is large groups of people who aren't representing the actual communities, who aren't walking the beat, and who don't know the people that they're supposed to be protecting, end up becoming enemies of the people, and the people become enemies of them, and they're suspect of everyone. Plenty of cases where police have totally ignored people because they don't want to go into a particular area to put their own lives or situation in danger. I can understand that in some cases, but this is to protect and serve is to protect and serve. I'm sorry, I see it as a very strong obligation if you're going to take that job to actually protect people that think that you're going to protect them. And not shoot someone like the other day a deaf guy was walking towards cops with a lead pipe. And I think one guy tried to tase him, the other guy shot him 6 times, I believe, and killed him. And everybody was yelling to the cops, he's deaf, he can't hear you, he can't hear you. They were telling him to stop, but he's deaf. He has a pipe, for God's sake. These are the things. Half of the time I've seen the police shootings where they shoot somebody running away. That, to me, is why I'm making this video. It's because of those police. The police who shoot unarmed people. The police who are so gun-happy or so out of control of their own emotions that they haven't prepared themselves for a situation where they encounter somebody who doesn't agree with them or doesn't follow their instructions, so therefore they kill them. This is becoming more and more well-known, but I wrote down a few notes of how and why I'm talking about this and how it's really costing society. It costs us in lawsuits and civil costs to deal with these, issues when they come up, to sue the police department or counter-sue. It costs a lot of money and a lot of resources and time out of our society. The individuals, it costs individual lives and freedoms because they're coerced into admitting to something that they never did some of the time. And even a few of these is a big problem. If a person's on death row for a crime they didn't commit, that may happen, but it's something that we should be striving to stop. Instead of trying to defend and find an excuse why we should keep a person in prison, if we have new evidence, weigh that evidence. But the police don't want to find out that they were wrong. The third thing I've got here is when some of the police take evidence. Some of them need lawyer fees to defend them just against individuals. Departments claim less than is actually paid out, like I said before. And the cost to imprison someone and to feed them and to keep them in prison in this private prison complex industry, which is just preposterous and a completely different story altogether. The cost to imprison someone, especially for a petty drug crime or for something they didn't commit, it costs billions yearly. And since the prisons are now becoming more and more privately run, they're raising the rates for everything. They're charging as much as they can for these prisoners and giving them crappier than ever food and service. And a person says, well, they're prisoners. They're not supposed to eat well. Well, I'll tell you, if you've ever been to jail on something like a pot charge and you find out that you have to eat this old rotten tasting bologna sandwiches and you think this is what people get every day, and if you're in the holding cell, that's all you get is these crappy little sandwiches every day, and some people stay in holding cells for months because there's not enough room in the cells. The time I went to jail for a pot charge, you know, they ran out of room in the dorm, so they put me in solitary confinement in this little tiny room with all these people who were screaming and yelling at each other and yelling at anybody who walks across the room. I mean, it was the epitome of douchebags in there. And, you know, people are just being stuck wherever they can. And unless you've been to jail, you don't understand. And I believe that, yes, punishment is a deterrent, but there have to be basic human rights. Being able to eat is a very important thing. It's one thing to eat crappy food. It's another thing where some of these prisoners have died from not getting enough water. There's a prisoner who died of dehydration a while back, because and the other prisoners were saying, hey, he's thirsty, he needs water, and they said, well, he can drink out of the toilet or something to that effect. There are things that go on behind closed doors that the media is not allowed to see in these prisons. Most of it, all of it, and most people just don't care. And I guess that's why I'm making this. Is I'm hoping people will care more about those who are falsely or wrongly accused of things, and those who are beaten, tortured, maimed, or harassed by police merely for looking different, being different. And I've been judged, you know, oh, you goddamn stoners, you know, I know we'll find something. I've seen them plant evidence on people. I've seen them tear my friend's Volkswagen bus apart when we were kids, trying to find one little piece of weed to bust him with. Another friend of mine, they just ripped his car to pieces until they found one pot seed and busted him for that. This isn't an issue of trying to, you know, uphold the law. This is about creating the law and morphing it around what they want to find. And, you know, planting evidence, abuse, all this is totally uncalled for and ridiculous. The last thing I'd like to talk about, the last cost to society, is probably one of the biggest ones, which is search and seizure. Illegal search and seizure is so common that most people don't even realize that it's happening. You do not have to be convicted of a crime to have all of your stuff stolen. So if if the cops have a search warrant for somebody's mansion and they think that they're making some illicit substance there, SWAT team comes, they raid the place, they tie up everything and they confiscate it. They find, you know, a bunch of cash, let's say. Or even if you're walking down the street and the cop decides to search you and finds like 10 grand on you, they can take that money, they can say they believe it's for drug use, and never have to give it back. And the police departments make a shitload off of these search and seizures, and Jeff Sessions just made that easier. He's trying to pass new laws to allow them to use federal funds for these search and seizures again, and to go against even state-run cannabis operations in legal states. To put it in perspective, last year, police seized more in cash and assets from American citizens who hadn't been charged than robbers stole in all home burglaries combined. So I have to ask myself who the real criminal is, and if people are being oppressed so much that they have to steal. You know, I can't justify thieves. I cannot stand thieves, but I also believe that people can police their own neighborhoods against these things, and they do. What are the cops really protecting except each other? You know. So my apologies if that comes across as brash, because I'm sure that there are great cops out there, and I've known good cops. But I also know a good cop, a truly good cop in his heart, will agree with what I'm saying here. That his fellow man should not be doing this. That people, if I work in a company and I find somebody's dumping toxic waste, I'm not going to just stick with the company and say, oh yeah, you know, that's okay. It's a company I work for. You know, this is what whistleblowers are constantly being harassed for. Trying to do the right thing. Trying to, you know, make people culpable, responsible for what they've done. And then the finger gets pointed back at the, you know, whistleblower as a narc or a rat. And a lot of times they are if they're ratting on individuals. That's a different story. If you're ratting someone out to protect yourself, that's not okay. It's more of a matter of saying what's true to protect the people that you represent. So that's my police ramble, and I hope you all have a wonderful day, and hopefully we can overcome some of this. There are some serious issues with police in this country, sure. But in some other countries, it is beyond horrible. I mean, they're basically government servants that go around and wiping out anybody who disagrees or digresses. And that's what I'm hoping we won't get to in the police state, because the police state situation we're entering right now, where small towns have SWAT vehicles and tanks and, you know, semi-automatic assault rifles and full riot gear just to go to a pot grower's house, and knowing, and what they're told is that the money that you seize, you can keep a bunch of it and use it for your department. This is wrong and has to be stopped. Police should not be able to keep any of the money from the seizures for their departments, because that implies that it encourages them to seize more stuff. So that's my rant, and talk to y'all later. Have a wonderful day. Take care of yourself, and if you have a cop behind you and you're driving to work, and you're worried about it, even though you've done nothing wrong, you're just like everybody else.